Hello and welcome back to Shakesyear. We are working on Richard III, and today we get to hear from mostly Buckingham, but a little bit of Richard, in what the folio calls Act 3, Scene 4, otherwise known as the scene that never ends, what other versions are now calling Act 3, Scene 7, because they wanted to split things up in such a way that it made a little bit more sense. So, the stuff that's going on. King Edward is dead, and his kids are hanging out in the tower until such time as his son Edward can be coronated, but Richard has made it so that nobody can go and visit them. Clarence is dead. His kids have been taken somewhere far, far away so that nobody can get at them either. And Richard is amassing a group to help him stage a coup. And the way that he's going to do this, because apparently he had no problems killing his brothers, but he doesn't necessarily want to kill kids, I guess, he is going to call into question the legitimacy of Prince Edward as the heir to the throne. So they killed Hastings because Hastings didn't want to be on Richard's side, and which means that the status of Lord Stanley is kind of still up in the air. But they sent the Lord Mayor out into the town to convince the people that Hastings had to die, that his being beheaded and his being beheaded so quickly was something that had to happen and that was legit. But then Richard also sent Buckingham after him to start spreading the rumors that Prince Edward is the illegitimate son of Edward, and also saying that if they have to take it so far as to say that King Edward was the illegitimate son of Edward's mother and Richard's mother, that's okay, but don't push that one too hard because Edward/Richard's mother is still alive and they don't want to, taint her too much, and or she could probably, refute the charges that Edward was illegitimate. So, and yesterday we got to hear from the general populace. We got to hear from the scrivener that was like, here's the warrant for Hastings' arrest, which was given to me to be transcribed 6 hours before he was actually arrested. So things are feeling weird there. So the sentiment amongst the general population is not necessarily on Richard's side, is what we get from the bit that happened yesterday. So at the top of Act 3, Scene 7, as it exists in a lot of versions, we have Edward talking to Buckingham, and Buckingham, remember, was supposed to go and tell the people that Prince Edward and Prince Richard are illegitimate, to try to pave the way for Richard, Duke of Gloucester, to take the throne. So Richard is like, so did you go out and tell the people? And Buckingham's like, yeah, I did. And he's like, so what did they say? And Buckingham's like, they really didn't say anything. They were quiet. Richard's like, did you tell them that Prince Edward was the illegitimate son of King Edward? And Buckingham says, I did. With his contract with Lady Lucy, and his contract by deputy in France, the insatiate greediness of his desire, and his enforcement of the city wives, his tyranny for trifles, his own bastardy as being got your father then in France, and his resemblance being not like the Duke. Withal, I did infer your lineaments being the right idea of your father, both in your form and nobleness of mind. Laid open all your victories in Scotland, your discipline in war, wisdom in peace, your bounty, virtue, fair humility, indeed left nothing fitting for your purpose untouched or slightly handled in discourse. And when my oratory drew toward end, I bid them that did love their country's good cry, God save Richard, England's royal king. And did they so? No. So God help me, they spake not a word, but like dumb statues or breathing stones stared each on other and looked deadly pale. Which, when I saw, I reprehended them and asked the mayor what meant this willful silence. His answer was, the people were not used to be spoke to, but by the recorder. Then he was urged to tell my tale again. Thus saith the Duke, thus hath the Duke inferred, but nothing spoke in warrant from himself. When he had done, some followers of mine own at the lower end of the hall hurled up their caps, and some 10 voices cried, God save King Richard! And thus I took the vantage of those few. Thanks, gentle citizens and friends, quoth I. This general applause and cheerful shout argues your wisdom and your love to Richard. And even here brake off and came away. So what Buckingham is saying here is he went out and tried his best. He threw every argument that he could in the face of all of these people, but nobody really wanted to cheer for Richard until at the very end, like the Lord Mayor said, is because they're not used to getting decrees from people other than the recorder, all this weird sort of stuff. But even when the Lord Mayor told the tale again, people were not cheering for Richard to be king, except for a handful of people who already knew Buckingham, who were like in the back. And Buckingham's even like, I tried to turn that into a thing, but it wasn't really a thing. And Richard is kind of like, stupid people, so what do we do now? And Buckingham's like, well, the Lord Mayor is on his way over, so what I suggest you do is go, like, bury your nose in a Bible and pretend that you've been studying religious texts all this time, because you, if indeed they are illegitimate and you should be king, then you need to be, pious and worldly and wise and all of this sort of stuff. So he's like, go hide yourself away and study religion. Lord Mayor is on his way over. And Richard's like, okay. So he leaves to go bury his nose in a book. And the Lord Mayor shows up and says to Buckingham, like, have you seen Richard? And Buckingham's like, no, he has sequestered himself in study. And then Catesby comes in and Buckingham's like, so have you seen Richard lately? Because we want to talk to him. And Catesby's like, no, he's not seeing anybody right now. And Buckingham's like, well, tell him that the Lord Mayor is here and needs to speak to him right away. So we must interrupt his studies. So there's still a lot of show going on, a lot of putting on face for various things, because Richard is not yet king. But that's a good place to pause for today, because this is a very long scene and we're going to get more into it tomorrow, and we're going to find out what happens. Like, does Richard come down and talk to him, and what are his excuses now, and what are his stories? How is he going to shift his narrative if people aren't buying the illegitimacy of the rightful heirs to the throne? So fun and intrigue, and I will see you tomorrow for more. Mwah.